In section 3, we're going to be starting to talk about high-fidelity prototyping. We'll review a few things in using advanced tools with Sketch and how to think about building out an output of your design systems. And what we're going to explore today is we're going to talk about why high fidelity in Sketch uses symbols, and we'll define some of our design elements that we've already started to build up to this point, but in wireframe form. We're going to talk about some of the decisions we need to make, including things that have to do with UI, consistency, elements, type, color, graphics, shapes, etc. And then we'll update some of our symbols just to start getting and building towards a more high fidelity output for our screens. This is all about considering some of the elements of our UI systems, but we're going to continue to get excited about our journey. So UI styling and Sketch symbols. UX is about building elements that can scale. Now the role of a user experience designer and user interface designer as a whole is to understand how to solve problems for users, right? And part of that starts at a very low fidelity. Can I validate an idea or a solution for a user, right? A sketch. Low fidelity, it's fast, it's quick, it gets a sense of what the user's trying to accomplish. And then it moves through levels of fidelity. And this can be designed, it can be branded, it can use color and type and image and all these things that kind of add to all the elements of what your user is trying to do that was formulated back from the sketch or validated through testing and all these things. So we're going to continue to do that. As a UX and UI designer, solving problems is really done quickly through prototypes. We've been working on prototyping tools through this video series and all the other that have been connected to this. But the reality of it is that, if we learn to apply human-centered methodologies, we can sketch what the business and users needs. We can then build low-fidelity prototypes to validate that, and then high fidelities that we can share back with our users and put into the world quickly. And the iterative process allows us to share our outcomes, allows us to learn faster, and it also makes us better at our design jobs. Now, the reality of high fidelity is that it should come over time. You don't ever start any idea with a high fidelity sketch because it will take you too long. So you start with low fidelity because you can get further in your iterations, right? You can learn more, you can address some ideas. But then as you start to refine and add color and images and stuff, you are also bearing out things like usability issues, things like validating whether that feature is needed or not, etc., etc. So the fun part about doing iterative design cycles is that you can prototype and validate and test really quickly, but you can also sketch and use then the software tools like Sketch that we've been looking at in training to help you speed you up so that you can move from the drawing board and the paper sketch to a high fidelity piece much faster. And the speed of that can help you then put the things into the world and present your ideas to your users in a more efficient way. Now, part of this thinking is kind of maintained through high-fidelity prototyping. And high-fidelity prototyping is fundamentally built on all the elements and bits that go into any design system, right? And part of this is then maintained by style guides. And there's lots of style guides. I'll show you a website called styleguides.io. You can go to it now. And styleguides.io is essentially a collection of style guides for all sorts of businesses. Businesses a lot of times place their style guides out in the world. If you're designing for the US web or you're designing for MailChimp, they have a published, publicly facing style guide and pattern library potentially that allows us to see how their design system works. Designers have worked on it really hard, and there's outputs that we can learn for how their design systems are set up. And we can take some of the things that we learn from each of these systems, like that of MailChimp or anyone else, and apply them. So I highly recommend you digging through a few of these style guides, get a sense of how they work, what their grid systems are, what their colors, what their things are, because this will be kind of some of the things that we'll be considering as we iterate our current system. So let's go back and discuss some of the things that we'll be doing in our system. Now, the style guides that you have, I highly recommend gathering a few that you really love. And any good designer is part sponge. We find ways to gather the things around us as we can. So let's go back into our Sketch app that we've been starting to build, and let's iterate some of our wireframe type buttons, the ones that were quick together for Sketch, and start adding some level of design to make them feel like they're getting closer to what our endpoint was supposed to be. Now this is going to go through a few rounds, so don't feel the pressure to do that, but we're trying to take another pass at the content that we were doing to add a level of polish to our outputs. Now in Sketch, One of the most valuable things that we had was these thing called symbols, right? So we have a number of elements that we can place once and then design or change and modify them across our entire system. So now we don't have to, if we had 75 buttons, we don't have to go and design all 75 buttons. We can just change one. And what I've done is I've actually copied my original version of these symbols. So if I make any modifications to the outputs, I can still go back and change it to these copies. And some things that I've done to start playing with the design is in the primary button, I've made a slight gradient at an angle with the rectangle. I did from corner to corner, just trying to add some styling. I could maybe change this color to be a little bit darker, a little bit lighter. And then we're going to do the same thing with this secondary button. And we're going to make it even lighter. Right now it's normal, and I want it to be a gradient. I'm going to select the color. I'm going to suggest it be a gradient. A linear gradient fill. This has the angle, so I can drag this the light side to the dark side. A 45-degree corner to corner. And now you can see that there's some things that have been modified. There's some nice colors that could be changed. I have a really light color, and I want this side to be completely white. And the other side to be this gray. Now, just like all these other tools, we've been able to kind of modify some of this stuff as we will. And one of the things that I think can actually help is maybe adding a shadow to the back image of this document. I'm going to make it a 2, have it do this. Maybe the blur is only a 2-degree blur. And now this will feel like it sits off the canvas a little more. I think I removed the shadow from the checkbox. We were leaving in this space that changes. And then I've also gone and modified the typography, if you can see. I've chosen a typeface that I personally like very much for legibility, which is DIN. And we'll talk about type in a couple of videos from now. Now, in these design systems, the up and the down, the checkbox, we're going to want to copy these same backgrounds for these up and down buttons so that when they move, they feel like they're the same. So I'm going to copy this background. Now remember, before you make some changes, you can actually go back and see the instances that these are being used. So in my list app that we had been working on in a wireframe form, now you can start to see how these symbols replace themselves. So now you can see there's some of the old buttons that I have and some of the new ones that I'm creating, and I'm making things have a little bit more style. I'm giving more space to the left because we might want to put an image or something in here to make my buttons a little bit more interesting. And all this is going to help with our logic and our structure. So let's go back to our symbols and just start replacing some buttons. Copy. I'm going to put this in the background of this shape. Send it back. By changing the titles, by adding the typeface in here, secondary, I can change all of these buttons pretty quickly. And let's say I wanted all of the background of this dark gray, just I don't feel like it's working. I can double click this because it is also a symbol, and I'm going to make it a light blue. So I've made this a light blue. If I wanted to make it even lighter, I could come over here and I could manipulate the color band. And we'll talk about this as we continue all our colors, but you can also add document colors because you're like, oh, I may be using this really light blue again. So I'm going to add it to my color span. And then my checkbox, I'm going to leave to have a stroke around the outside. So I'm liking how that feels a little bit better. But in my other spaces, I need these to also have the light blue color. So I can select both and change the color to that light blue. Now if I return to my app list, all of my pages will start to have buttons and screens that are starting to take on a little bit more designed look and feel. Now, This could go through a number of rounds. Like, I'm not sure I'm in love with the blue. I may need to play with some of the labels on these things to make sure that they're being overridden correctly. And if they're grouped, you can ungroup them so that you can get to them faster. So I could just ungroup these. And now we could kind of be faster at applying some of these buttons. The second button is here. I could change the copy. This is, I'm supposed to say kumquats, lemons. Right, I'm playing with like, is it uppercase? Is it lowercase? I kind of like it where it's not always uppercase. Seems like it's yelling at you all the time. So like, play with a few things that like the variables at which you already have in your system, but start designing the elements to be far more designed. And what I challenge you to do is with your symbols that you already have, go update them. Make them less wireframey and more what you think could be more sophisticated in your design, right? You could change your typefaces, you can update some outputs, you can add some iconography to some of your pieces and tools. And this will then be what we'll be continuing to build on in the next couple of videos. In this video series and in this app that you're building, we're going to be working on high fidelity components. And in the high fidelity of these elements, the challenge that I give to you is to not just build them for yourself, but create a conversation, show them to your friends. Put them out in the world, put them into an envisioned prototype and share the iterations that you're going through, because there's lots of decisions to be made, but you can do them relatively quickly and then validate them back through our testing process. And you don't just jump from low fidelity to super high fidelity. There's lots of steps in between as you continue to practice and build and design more. And the best part about it is that we look for things that maybe inspire us, right? We're trying to see if the idea works in our list app. And then we're like, well, no, we need to evolve it to make it more useful. And the evolution of that starts with color, starts with type, starts with, moving some pieces around maybe, and then we validate all that stuff over and over again. And so I recommend working hard at getting your app as far as you can make it. And in the next video, we're going to be continuing to build out more of our steps and get closer to what our user needs by building to a higher fidelity.